Good day, mates. It is June the what is it? The 5th? It's got to be like June 5th, or yeah, I think it's June the 5th. 4th. It's June the 4th, 2023. Today, the live stream is going to be about American Gladiators, one of my favorite shows of my childhood that honestly went off the air way too soon. I had so much fun with it. It's crazy that I don't remember individual things about American Gladiators. I just remember the pairing of American Gladiators and WWF wrestling back to back every Saturday, and it was a good reason to be in the house. You know, I didn't do too much on Saturdays before 1 o'clock. I think Superstars came on at 12. I think American Gladiators maybe came on at 11, or maybe it came on at 1. I'm not sure which one it was, but I uh I had so much fun with American Gladiators. And for those of you who are too young to remember American Gladiators, or maybe you watched some of these lame reboots that they did, to watch the original American Gladiators, there's actually a channel on YouTube that is showing the shows almost in perpetuity, similar to um going to with like GI Joe. You know, like GI Joe, there's a going to be a thing, and if you go to um, the site or the channel, you'll find episodes of GI Joe that's kind of like running. It's similar with American Gladiators. So I'm telling you, it is a fun show, and you would have a blast watching it, especially if you're a wrestling fan. It is very much like pro wrestling, but it's very competitive. And so we're going to talk about American Gladiators. I did some extra reading in addition to the biography, the documentary, and we're going to talk about it. And we are we going to spend 2 hours on it? I don't know. We'll we'll have to see. But it was an extremely fun show. But I think part of the reason why I want to talk about this show is it's twofold. One, that I found out that there's going to be a second American Gladiators documentary, a Netflix American Gladiators documentary. It's going to be coming out in June 28th. So American Gladiators, they basically split the documentary into two things. ESPN did a 30 for 30. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is a two-part American Gladiators documentary. But a lot of the gladiators don't like the creator, so they did not participate in this particular documentary. A lot of the gladiators participate in the Netflix uh, documentary that's going to be coming out this same month. So actually, in 24 days, there's going to be another American Gladiator documentary, and we're going to talk about that one too, because I'm guaranteed they're probably going to bring out a little bit more of the quote unquote sleaze of American Gladiators, which people like to do. They like to sit down and talk about the sleaze, but this didn't have a lot of sleaze in it. It touched on some things, but it didn't go into any real details about it. Um, so it was fun, you know. So hello, everybody. WG Phil. I'm him 24/7. How you guys doing? Everybody else who's just kind of sitting back, chilling, wanting to know a little bit about American Gladiators. It is one of the shows like WMAC Masters, WWF Superstars, etc., that are a show from my childhood that I hold near and dear to my heart, even if everybody else hates it. I love American Gladiators, like legit. You know, uh, did I have a favorite gladiator? No. All of them look like Sting, as far as I'm concerned. It wasn't until recent years that I really kind of looked back and was like, wow, they had individual personalities, they had individual gimmicks, somewhat. Um, so we're going to talk about it. And I actually read the old Sports Illustrated article about Austin Murphy about American Gladiators, and it says a lot because I think that's where I want to start. Because I don't want to just tell the story that you could watch in a 30 for 30. I want to, if you want to just go a blow for a blow, you could just watch the damn thing yourself. It's about 4 hours because it's two parts. So that probably means like 3 hours really with commercials. American Gladiators was created, well, the initial idea came from a man named Dan Carr. Dan Carr is an American Apache Indian from Erie, Pennsylvania. He was a strong man who really participated in things like arm wrestling. But more importantly, he was a union worker. He was I believe they say he worked he was an iron worker, Dan Carr. And during picnics, the iron workers' picnics, he would contract these games, kind of like Olympic games. And he would set these things up. And at or around 1980, 1982, he met this guy named Johnny Ferraro, who was a Elvis impersonator. And this Elvis impersonator and Dan Carr, they put together the very first American Gladiators live show at a school gym in Erie, Pennsylvania. And they got about 3 or 4 thousand people to show up to this show. And it was classic strongman stuff. It was, you take average guys and they compete against bigger, stronger, faster guys in arm wrestling competitions and pulling competitions and various different competitions for charity. It was for charity initially. So Johnny Ferraro was very impressed with some of the ideas that Dan Carr came up with. And then he flew out to Hollywood. He wrote a script to try to make American Gladiators a TV show, a movie. And he went out to Hollywood, and he spent 6 months or six. No, it was 8 years actually. He spent 8 years out there in Hollywood pitching this thing as a movie to anybody that he could. Instead of doing his elevator pitch over and over again, he actually recorded it into a cassette tape. Anytime he came across a producer or somebody like that, he would just play the tape. So it was very impressive, his doggedness. And eventually, Johnny Ferraro ended up meeting this guy who his name was Ron Ziskin, who bought the idea for $2,500. Now, Johnny Ferraro, in order to make American Gladiators work, he ended up leaving Dan Carr in Erie, Pennsylvania. So for years, the show was on the air, and Dan Carr had nothing to do with it. And he was boiling angry back in Erie, Pennsylvania, because he wasn't getting any royalties and he wasn't getting anything off of the product that he had come up with. So basically, in the documentary, he's telling this story about it being another white man, steals from the Indian story, which I kind of could have did without, but it was an entertaining angle, I guess you could say. They had to play the race angle that the white guy stole an idea from an Indian and went and stole it to other white guys and ended up blowing up and the Indian never got paid and all this kind of stuff. Even though he did get paid a little bit later on. But that's really the story of the 30 for 30 is they interspersed different things about how popular American Gladiators was with the story of Dan Carr and Johnny Ferraro. In the second episode, it's essentially just searching for Dan Carr, who, for some reason, Johnny Ferraro didn't want them to talk to Dan Carr. I'm not sure why, because especially since they were friendly at the time. But that was basically the second part. The first part was a lot about how the show came to be. It was a Sam Goldwyn production. It was a syndicated television show. And it was extremely popular. The entire idea, of course, was to get a lot of former athletes, bodybuilders, and that's what the Gladiators were. A lot of the Gladiators were bodybuilders. Almost all of them were on steroids. They even admit it today. They were on steroids. And to take average people and to put them up against the Gladiators in various different kinds of games. And it's a very simple premise. Simple is good. The story is incredibly simple. Can you overpower this guy with a gigantic Q-tip? in the Joust. It was one of my favorite games. Um, and it's incredibly fun to watch. Now, the reason I chose to start with just the beginning of the show is that one of the knocks against American Gladiators that you got, especially if you look it up, you do some research, is you get that it was considered violent, lowbrow entertainment. It was crash TV. It was never supposed to work, and you, it's one of those things where a lot of things that appeal to the lower middle class or the poor comes from the lower middle class and the poor. You know, mixed martial arts being one of them. American Gladiators apparently is another one. Boxing, MMA, pro wrestling. A lot of these things come from people who don't have a lot. A lot of this competition and combat. American Gladiators was real. A lot of people didn't know that. Uh, they really won. They really lost. The gladiators weren't always the best. Some of them were even competed injured. So, sometimes they would look like they were not putting forth 100% effort. They were letting people win. But in reality, they were either trying to avoid injury or they were dealing with injuries or they were just weak in that game. Because sometimes, and I think Ice, one of the gladiators, she does a podcast where she talks about American Gladiators. She told a story that the producers knew which gladiators were better at what games. And they would try to match the gladiator to the contender to give the contender a chance. So if a gladiator was weak on, let's say, Joust, then and the contender is smaller, then you would get a weak gladiator on Joust because it would give the contender a better chance. Um, a lot of people tend to believe that American Gladiators was set up to make the gladiators look good, when in reality it was put together to make the contenders look good. But back to what I was saying about lower middle class people is Dan Carr was a lower middle class guy from Erie, Pennsylvania, an iron worker who put this together with his friends to entertain themselves. And it ended up becoming a national thing. It never intended to leave Erie, Pennsylvania, but it ends up being this national thing that appeals to a lot of people because of the competitive nature of it. And because, yeah, there was some violence, you could, if you ever saw like the human cannonball game where the guy swings on the rope and the gladiator has to stand there with a padded shield and you crash into that gladiator and they're not wearing, this was the late 80s, early 90s, they're not wearing headgear. So sometimes like Malibu, one of the gladiators, his knee hit him in the nose or I think it hit him in the head, gave him a concussion. So you could see like blood trickling from his head and it was considered barbaric, you know? But that's really what people wanted to see. People wanted to see competitions, and in competitions, people really get hurt. You know, a football player knocked out the gladiator Nitro during one of the games because the guy used to play football. So sometimes the contenders, well, most of the time the contenders were real athletes too. They had like serious athletic backgrounds, and they would go through intense tests in order to be considered a contestant for American Gladiators. And I forget what the guy's name was. As a matter of fact, I don't think I knew ever. But if you go to the website, I'm sorry, the YouTube channel, and you look it up, you could probably find when Nitro got knocked out in the game. The guy was a fullback in the NFL, you know? So it's a game where you pick up the ball, you run, put it in the little bucket or whatever. And the gladiators have to try to stop you. And the guy just runs Nitro over, gives him a huge concussion. Nitro is walking around like a zombie for the rest of the game. It's crazy, right? That shit, it ruled, bro. Like, I sit back and I laugh at it, even though, the guy got hurt, it sucks, but it ruled. Like that's a real competition. It's no phony baloney crap, you know. But of course, it was considered barbaric. It was considered lowbrow. Of course, especially considering the gladiators were on steroids, that was a whole thing. They were. If I'm probably going to end up reading parts of that Murphy, that guy. Leave it to some upper middle class journalist to find something that poor people are liking and enjoying, and then going and writing an article and poking fun at it. There's literally nothing that you know people who are considered lower income can enjoy without it being made fun of. You know, rap music is another one. I make fun of rap music myself, but rap music is from the gutter. It's made by the people who are in the gutter, and is mostly enjoyed by people who are in the gutter. And you'll often, not as much anymore because it's considered almost racist to talk bad about rap music, but they tried to ban rap. It was vulgar. It's like, well, people in the street don't talk like people in boardrooms. People in the street don't talk like professors in colleges. They're not well-adjusted people all the time. You know, and so when you learn, because it's very interesting, because I came up with another story um, about the history of catch wrestling. I forget what the name of the guy is. I'm about to look it up because he was a friend of Carl Gotch. Um, and he wrote an article. Well, he wrote a book, actually. I got the book. I haven't read it yet. It's like on the history of catch wrestling. And he talks about catch wrestling being something that miners used to do to entertain themselves. It started out as these guys were bored at work or wherever, or bored after work, or bored on their break or whatever, and they would just kind of wrestle each other, just as a way of blowing off some steam. His name was Jake Shannon. So you know, so you have a lot of these. There's some stories about pit fighting being sort of the the genesis of boxing, even though boxing kind of has boxing, like wrestling, is one of those things that's kind of been around forever. Like since human history, somebody put their fist up at somebody else or grab somebody else. But there was talks that lower class coal miners would dig holes in the ground, and each man would dig a hole and put himself in it, and then they would side bet, and they just sit there and punch each other in the face, kind of like Rock'em Sock'em Robots. But you couldn't leave your hole. And that was like one of the genesis of boxing. Is people found that entertaining. They would bet on it. And so you would see like the lower class would always create these entertainment things that the upper class will always turn their nose up at until it became very, very popular. Then all of a sudden they jump on board. Now you see pretty much everybody's got a favorite rapper, even if they don't identify at all with what comes with it. And American Gladiators is one of those things too. It's one of those things that you get people that used to make fun of the people for liking it and enjoying it or whatever. And then the movie stars wanted to participate, and they started talking about it on TV. American Gladiators, at its height, I think it said, had 6.5 million viewers per week. It was a huge draw. Some people even considered it to be one of the reasons why pro wrestling had a dip at around the same time. Even though I think the dip in pro wrestling probably happened near the end of the original American Gladiators run. Like some people, I saw some guys, European wrestling fans, say that when like Gladiators UK happened, it kind of killed the WWF in their dominance in the UK for a few years. So that was something that I don't know how true that is. I'll have to do a little bit more research, but It's just something that it came along at just the right time. It had blood and gore and glory, and it felt real. And it's a simple story of David versus Goliath. There's a different David every week, but it's also in a tournament fashion. And the games are fun, even though the games were dangerous, you know? And it really appealed to people. And then you have these nobodies who decide they're going to be the moral arbiters of reality and say that it's too dangerous. You can't do this, it's dangerous. Okay. Now, in the documentary, they kind of talked about the downfall of American Gladiators being essentially more extreme things came along in the later 90s, like the X Games and some other things that kind of kicked back up. I think pro wrestling kicked back up and the show was canceled in 1996. So I think it was wrestling hadn't turned itself around completely at that time, but it was on the verge of turning itself around. It was probably like a couple of months from WCW had turned it around, so pro wrestling was starting to change, and American Gladiators kind of started to peter out a little bit. But it was incredibly fun, and this documentary, I don't think it did a really great job, to be quite honest. It was 2 hour. It was two sets of documentaries, and I don't really think they were that great. Now, the reason why I don't think they were that great is because it focused so much on, well, the second one at least, who is Dan Carr. It didn't tell us anything. Now they did talk to the gladiators that were there, the gladiators that participated. We got to know about those guys, but there were so many gladiators, and so many of them refused to participate in this documentary that it did ended up affecting the documentary. I think all in all, they probably got four gladiators to talk. They got Malibu, who was the sort of surfer guy. He had the big puffy hair. He looked a lot like what's the uh he had the personality of like a surfer dude. He had the big hair like the Ultimate Warrior. He was jacked, giant guy. Um, Interestingly enough, his story was very interesting too. Um, he says that he had issues with his father, that him and his dad had bonded over sports, and he always tried to excel at sports. And then one day, his dad just kind of left, and he always has been searching to make his dad proud. So he became a police officer. Then he became a stripper in the 90s, and I'm sorry, in the late 80s, 85, mid 80s. I'm pretty sure that didn't make his dad happy. And then he said that he saw an ad in the newspaper for Big Jack Dudes, and he answered the ad in the newspaper, and it's for American Gladiators. And he did an interview and a tryout of the obstacle course, and Malibu was born. Malibu he got injured. He had a serious concussion on the head cannon game when he got blasted off the platform, and he fell from the sky into the cushions. Now, because the documentary isn't very well structured, it's not. I have to put it together. They talked about the construction of the games. Now, the guy who constructed the games, his name was, I don't know. Where's the guy's name? I got so many papers. I'm trying to remember what the guy's name was who created the games. But he always wanted the games to be in the air because he liked the idea of the crowd looking up on platforms and uh, seeing that the gladiators were larger than life, and liking the idea of people falling from the sky or the threat of falling from the sky. So he always liked that idea, and so a lot of the games were high in the air. I can't find the name of the guy who created the games. Uh, so But Malibu got a serious concussion when he fell off the platform. Okay, his name is Steve Graziani. He was the creator of the games. Um, so I liked that the games on top of the platform. I liked Assault the best. That was one of my favorite games too. It's the game where the contender has to hit a target that's next to the gladiator while the gladiator is shooting tennis balls at the contender. It's such a fun game. You know, it's fun to watch. It's visually appealing. Like, you know, it has a little bit of everything that you would want. But Malibu got injured. He became sort of a weak gladiator after that. After he got that serious concussion, he became sort of weak and they ended up replacing him. So he was one of the guys that they had in here. Another guy they had in here was Gemini, one of the black gladiators. He played football in college and was in the actually got drafted to the NFL before he got suffered an injury that set him back. And he said he had no interest in being on television or being a TV star, but this is one of the things that paid his bills. And he talked in the biography about his real name, I believe, is Michael Hutton. And he was away from his family a lot. And he went to the creator, Ferraro, and said, like, hey, you know, I'm missing my children grow up. I'm missing all this stuff. And the guy told him, you can't be Michael Hutton anymore. You got to be Gemini. You got to be that guy 24/7, you know, because you're a hero to so many children and you're a hero to so many people. Your family just gonna have to go on the back burner. And the guy actually did it. He was one of the longest tenured gladiators and was there until the show went off the air. And uh, he was in the episode weeping about the sacrifice that he had to make. That while he was putting smiles on the faces of so many other people's children, he was missing his own children grow up. Now, if you're all of us are wrestling fans, we know how that's pretty common when it comes to pro wrestling. So we're not, you know, moved by that as much. But also, I said they only work 10 weeks a year, you know, so who knows how much of that was, you know, kind of a worry. But they did a good job of, you know, telling Gemini's story, you know. They talked about Saber, who was one of the gladiators. Saber actually went on to play Jax in the Mortal Kombat movie. I think it was Mortal Kombat Annihilation that he was in. Um, but he grew up in a blood neighborhood. He was a gangbanger. And said how he carried guns everywhere and he was living a very dangerous life. But being big and jacked, you know, he this show saved his life because it gave him something else to work towards. And he talked about how his nephew was killed by the police, and then they had done an episode of American Gladiators that featured police officers. I think it was the Los Angeles Police Department, and he was from Los Angeles or Compton or something like that. And he got an opportunity to joust with a police officer, and how he viciously beat this police officer about the head and neck with this gigantic padded Q-tip, and then cut like a wrestling promo on, you know, staying focused, and one day you could do what you always dreamed of, like beat up a police officer. It was great, you know. It was legit, you know. And knowing that giving people purpose changes their lives around. I mean, how could you be surprised by this? Um, and one of the young ladies is named Elektra. She said she was inspired by superhero comics. Obviously, there's a Marvel Comics character named Elektra. Um, so there wasn't a lot of the of the gladiators in this joint, but they did talk to one of them named Thunder, and Thunder is a really sad case because he's basically like the Darren Drozdov of American Gladiators. I mean, this guy has atrophy in pretty much all of his limbs. He's addicted to painkillers even today, so he's been on painkillers for 30 years. He can't walk long distances without being, without pain. You know, it was, and they did a they didn't do a really good job of like really drilling in on this, but a lot of the people said that Johnny Ferraro really wanted more, as Gemini put it, they wanted more smash in the show. That it had to be, heads up contact. And Ferraro was always pushing for more and more contact, and that ended up with more and more injuries. And this is where you learn that they had to have, of course, backup gladiators. So people like, Viper, who was one of the gladiators mentioned in here, he was a backup. And he wasn't very well liked by the rest of the gladiators because they knew why he was there. He was there to be a replacement. And, I think he ended up replacing Malibu, actually. But I mean, if you're doing a contact sport, of course you need to have backups. You need to have ringers, I mean, that's common sense. But a lot of these people were, again, they were bodybuilders. Very few of them were athletes. Now, in terms of the labor element, um, they said, well, Ice, let's put it like this, because she of course, again, like I said, she hosts a podcast, and she said that they were paid about $550 per episode. That they were the lowest paid performers in entertainment because nobody was sure what they were, if they were actors or athletes. And to be quite honest, they were athletes. They're not actors because even though it was a TV show, even she admitted that what they were doing was legit. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't fixed. That would put them in the athletic competition situation. And she said when it comes to the tour, they did 106 cities in 6 months. And there was a lot of partying on that bus because they traveled by bus. That the girls were showing off their bodies. They talked about it in the documentary a little bit in terms of there was a lot of sex and drugs and partying on those buses. During the tour, they were drinking a lot. Some of them were even skipping shows because they were unprofessional, which is the kind of thing that one would expect, especially if you're a wrestling fan. You already know how this kind of stuff happens. So there was a lot in here that you could learn about American Gladiator. Now, when it comes to when they were at their height, they had this comes from the Sports Illustrated article. They gained $15 million in merchandise from Mattel, who made action figures and lunch pails and etc. While the Gladiators did get residuals on the episodes when they were re-aired, but they didn't get any royalties. No royalties for the usage of their likeness, which means they got absolutely hosed for years and years. They got paid nothing on the action figures that bear their name and their face, or the posters, or the video game that came out. They didn't get anything. Like, that's absolutely dreadful, you know? And to be quite honest, if we're being fair, a lot of WWF wrestlers probably wouldn't have been getting that stuff either if it hadn't been for like Hulk Hogan and Jesse the Body Ventura, who actually went to Vince and sort of pushed for royalties. Well, Jesse Ventura was the guy who was they give him credit for pushing for royalties, but if I remember correctly, Hogan was getting them already anyway. And it was because Hogan was getting them that Jesse the Body Ventura wanted it, and then it ended up being pretty much for everybody. Ended up being a good business venture because now the boys have every reason to push the action figures and everything. But for a while, wrestlers in WWF, or the early part, they weren't getting royalties either. But I'm very glad that they ended up getting royalties off like the video games and stuff. Especially when you see that the American Gladiators didn't get anything. Like, they were huge for years. And they didn't get anything off of those action figures and the video games and stuff that they were doing, which is awful. That's truly awful stuff. And she said they was only being paid $550 per episode. But they did 52 episodes, so there's one a week. Then she said they had to hustle in their in their time off, so they had to do personal appearances. So they had to do comic cons, different types of meet and greets, etc., in order to get paid. But they were able to use their name in doing so, and so many of them still use their name today. Like Ice still uses her name for her podcast. Nitro uses his name for his book. So apparently the whoever, I guess Ferraro and Carr, who own American Gladiators, they don't own the names. I don't know, or are they just not tripping on people, using the name, or they just don't care. Um, but people are still using the name. But they didn't get paid a lot, so that sucks. Um, there was quite a few things that they discussed that hopefully the Netflix documentary goes more into. For instance, Ice talked about not being able to bring her girlfriend because apparently she's a lesbian. She wasn't able to bring her girlfriend on the road because they thought it would not be good for the brand if one of the characters was outed as being gay. So that's something that would have been nice if we could have, talked to them a little bit more about that. But they just had like a recording of her saying it that because she wasn't in the episode. But I'm guessing they're going to talk more about that in the Netflix documentary. A lot of their bodies started breaking down due to steroids. That's a Nitro thing. He was one of the guys who has been more vocal against the show, especially since the reboots. They have not. Most of the Gladiators have not been happy about the reboots. But what else could we talk about here? Let's see. So Dan Carr's writings. I want to talk about that in a few minutes too. We'll get around to talking about the things that he wrote, because they were pretty brutal things that he wrote about, guys. Oh yes, here's one. Here's something that I thought was interesting. Malibu was actually a pro wrestler. He went and he worked as Malibu as a wrestler, and in his time off because he figured, it was a good way to trade on his name and people already knew who he was because of American Gladiators. But here's the interesting thing is he said his wife was offered a WWF contract and she was going to be a women's wrestler in the WWF. And she went and got liposuction to lose 15 pounds and ended up dying from a blood clot. So I had never heard that story before. As a wrestling fan, I've never heard that story before. I don't even, it's hard to imagine like a situation that was so awful because he wanted to be in the WWF and it never worked out for him. And it's tough, And apparently, the liposuction, blood clot stuff happens quite a bit, It's it's tough, but that's why you say that people need to be a little bit more careful when it comes to these sort of body modification programs. Even though people act like they're never a big deal, it is. That stuff's dangerous. I'm sorry, I've been rambling for like 40 minutes now. Let's see what you guys got. I'm him 24/7 says I remember Saturday morning cartoons and teen shows. My local station was Fox 15. Afternoon was Soul Train, WWF Superstars, and American Gladiators. Talk about childhood memories. Ah, yes, Soul Train. Oh man, I love Soul Train. I absolutely do love Soul Train. I miss Soul Train. I miss Soul Train. It was it's awful, man. I hate that it's gone. You know, I hate that it's gone. That was another one of those things that was incredibly fun. Now, here's an article that I found on Malibu's wife. Her name was Durzan, Drzan McBee. She was a cheerleader she went to the Ultimate Pro Wrestling in Southern California. Ah, yes. So she was a bodybuilder who tried to go through that system. The same system with John Cena and Samoa Joe. She tried to go through there. And she ended up dying. This is awful. Um, so this is an interesting piece. So this is from April the 9th, 2002, from the Los Angeles Times. It says, pro wrestling occupies a gray zone of sports requiring a tremendous athleticism and competitive nature, even though the outcome is predetermined. Body Slam, the making of a pro wrestler, veers into that gray area of its own, chronicling the struggles of four hopefuls, but also coming across at times as a promotional vehicle. Um, Body Slam, the making of a pro wrestler. This sounds like something I should have seen, but I don't know what this is. This is apparently a TV show on TLC. It says it begins by introducing Durzan McBee, a former NFL cheerleader, a mother, a born-again Christian. Big John Heidenreich, an ex-NFL player who works two jobs as a bouncer. Mikey Henderson, a would-be Backstreet Boy, and Chris Daniels, the fallen angel and the elder statesman of the group. So Christopher Daniels was on this television show with John Heidenreich and Durzan McBee. Durzan McBee was married to Malibu, who was an American Gladiator. This is very interesting. It says all four have come to Ultimate Pro Wrestling, a Southern California production company and school to wrestle on an independent circuit, a minor league to the WWF. Interesting. And I'm going to look this up, and we're probably going to end up doing some kind of video on this. But to go to Rick Bassman's school, the same school that produced Samoa Joe, and that's very interesting. That's very, very interesting. And she ended up dying, you know? So, and she also apparently sued her husband for domestic violence, or she had him arrested for domestic violence. That's tough. This is in September 2022. I'm sorry, September 2002. Yeah, I mean, just looking into this kind of thing is pretty crazy. So here's Pro Wrestling Insider from the first. Let's see. Oh yeah, Pro Wrestling Insider explains that Durzan was training as a wrestler in California, was featured in 2002 documentary Body Slam, The Making of a Professional Wrestler. In the doc, McBee noted that his wife sadly passed away in 2003 as a result of a complication after undergoing a liposuction surgery to remove 15 pounds. While he was away, a surgery he noted she didn't really need. That is true, apparently, because she is dead. This is unfortunate. This is tough, you know. It's a pretty crazy story, man. But you would think that a lot more of these guys would have got into wrestling. They were already doing combat and contact stuff. Why some? And I guess it was a different. This was around the steroid trial, I guess, and all of them were on steroids, every single one of them. So maybe that was the reason why Vince never picked any of these guys up. And these guys were massive, by the way. Like so many of them were like they were huge and jacked. I mean, Vince could have just rolled around in money for some of these people. And since they already were over from American Gladiators, could have been great. But at the time, Vince was in the middle of a thing with steroid trial. It didn't quite work out. Now, let's go into the Sports Illustrated article on American Gladiators a little bit. Gods and Goddesses at Play from December the 2nd, 1991. Okay, so this was written by Austin Murphy. I'm not going to read the whole thing. And it's really no point in reading the whole thing because I already give away so much of it. He says, Gladiators is approaching a kind of critical mass. David Letterman can be counted on to make occasional snide references to the show. Arsenio Hall announced his intention of quitting his talk show to pursue his true vocation, American gladiating. Ridiculous. Sports agent David Fishoff reports that several of his clients, including Cincinnati Reds pitcher Randy Myers and former New York Giants special teams player Phil McConkey, have begged to get them on the show. He says, who is exactly tuning in? The show is most popular among males between the ages of 18 and 34, due largely to the fact that the female gladiators are extremely fit and clad in excruciatingly tight uniforms. This is how is it that somebody who is a male doesn't understand boys? How is that the case? You know, how is it the case that you can really say that men are only watching this show because the women are in tight leotards? I'm pretty sure that helps, but guys like sports, and this is a sports-based show. It's competition. That's what it's about. And guys watch American Ninja Warrior, all these sort of obstacle course shows. They love these things. They never seem to last, for a long period of time. But guys typically like these things. That's why they watch that's why they watch sports. They watch competitions. They want to see the David and Goliath story. It's not necessarily that these girls are in tight leotards, and it helps. But to fully not understand men while being a man takes a great deal of effort. Like, you really have to be working hard to not understand guys and be a guy. But then again, just because you're a male doesn't mean you're a guy, I guess. He continues, the show, which airs on Saturday afternoons in many markets, has attracted a young audience of children who see the gladiators as flesh and blood superheroes. Cash prizes are at stake, but the contenders aren't in it for the money. Yeah, right. Of course they are. It says, who are these gladiators, these vascular, hair-sprayed human caricatures? How are they caricatures? They're just big people. They're just large people. He goes into some of the gladiators and what their real names are, etc. Says the competition may be authentic, but little else about gladiators is as it seems. A few of their physiques, not just the guys, shout pharmaceutically enhanced. The gladiators aren't tested for steroids, but the show's producers comfort themselves with the knowledge that most of the gladiators are bodybuilders who must submit to testing at competitions. Their tans, so handsomely cocoa on television, turn out to be a weird off orange in real life because they come out of a bottle. So what? Again, it's always these people who feel like they have to try to debunk or expose. You're not naturally bronze like this. It's like, come on, do you do this to like regular movies and stuff? Like, do you really just go down to, whoever is putting together a movie and say, like, you know what? I don't think Robert De Niro is really a Jew in this movie Casino. I think he's putting it on. Like, what are you talking about? Who cares about any of this crap? Apparently, this guy actually tried to get onto the show, and he couldn't pass the physical test. But that's entertaining. That's an entertaining thing. But this was probably the most high-profile article written on American Gladiators, at least at the time. So it was it's a fun thing to read about, but um it's pretty crazy that it's not it's exactly what you would expect from somebody who is an outsider who's coming in treating you like an anthropological subject. You know, these journalists, they come around, they start treating everything like a zoo where you're weird and you're kooky. Why would you ever do this? It's like it's just a competition show, man. It's like people do obstacle courses literally all the time. It's not that big of a deal. The NFL Combine is an obstacle course. If they wanted to monetize it by putting it on TV, which I think sometimes they do, they could. The military boot camp is an obstacle course. If they wanted to monetize it by putting it on TV, they probably could. You know, there's nothing over the top. Well, there's a lot of television production that kind of goes into the whole thing of American Gladiators, but at the end of the day, it's just competition. So it's okay to just chill out and let people compete in the way that they choose to do so. Um, but that article was mostly about that, you know, making fun of their spray tans and their hair and everything. Um, Now the show, it was canceled in I think 1996. The reason that they were given was that the show's ratings had begun to diminish. I think there was also some complaints about money. In the documentary, they say that Nitro, who was one of the gladiators, and a couple of other gladiators had threatened to strike over the fact that they were not getting paid royalties and residuals, and they had to pay for their own injuries, so they basically had to pay for their own medical. It was like a lot of horrible, really bad business stuff that these guys didn't seem to get. You know, like wrestling doesn't give you insurance, right? You're an independent contractor, you don't get insurance. But they typically take care of you if you're injured. You know, they typically, you know, at least some people pay you while you're injured, while you're rehabbing. You may get like a portion of your paycheck or whatever. I think the bigger deal is the amount of money that the company was making and not paying out anybody. Like one of the co-creators, who was Dan Carr, wasn't even getting paid, and so and then also the gladiators wasn't really getting paid. They said he made about $25,000 a year for 52 shows with no residuals, no royalties. I said about $550 per episode. Again, she said they got residuals, but they didn't get royalties. Residuals would be money that they get for replay of the show. Royalties would be things like merchandise. That would be the difference. Um, so Sam Goldwyn, who was one of the producers of the show, actually fired the gladiators who went on strike, and that kind of led to the end of it. And that's really when the show went off the rails, and they brought in a bunch of replacement gladiators, thinking that the gladiators were replaceable and that you could just get new ones. Like, here's the weird thing about that, because technically the gladiators were not that important to the show at that point, because the show had pivoted towards being more about the contenders. That being said, you still are getting rid of familiar faces and people that the crowd does connect with, and just replacing them with randos who, they don't have any connection to Viper or Tower or whoever, right? You can't just replace people. People are not replaceable. That's the thing. Like, they may be expendable, but they're not replaceable. Like, if somebody tries to go on strike, I agree, fire them. But you have to take time to. You can't just cancel the show because the ratings went down. Like, you fired some very popular characters on the show. You should expect the ratings to go down. It should have been expected. Like, okay, well, Nitro was pretty popular. He got fired. for trying to lead a revolt against the company or whatever. He ended up writing a book. I tried to find like a PDF version of it or something like that, and all I kept getting was how much he talked about steroids. That he talked about the damage steroids have done to his body. It's like I've read enough wrestlers talk about steroids and all the steroids they did to their body. Um, but he also started doing steroids in 1981, so it was long before he was even on the show. I think he started doing steroids at like high school level, and he talked about having testicular atrophy, which I'm saying, boy, Jesus himself would have had me say that one out loud. I'd have kept that one to my grave. Like, yeah, doing steroids made my balls dry up. I wouldn't have told nobody that, but then again, I guess he's living his truth, quote unquote, whatever. I don't know. Um, but it was a really fun show. I think it deserves a better documentary. It just the documentary just felt like it touched on certain things. Didn't go into any real detail about anything except Dan Carr and his feud with Johnny Ferraro over who was the real creator of American Gladiators, where Johnny Ferraro essentially continually muscled his way into being the co-creator, when in reality he didn't have much to do with it outside of pitching it to Hollywood. And then he had wrote a movie for some odd reason and ended up with a TV show. Now let's talk about the Dan Carr part, because he said he wanted to kill Johnny Ferraro, and that was an interesting time in the documentary, because they're reading from his self-published book called Tough Luck, and he's of course telling the story of how he came up with these games as an iron worker long before he even met Johnny Ferraro, and that Johnny Ferraro was just a guy who popped up as he put on one of these shows in like the early 80s. And basically he basically latched on to them and buddied up to them and said, hey, I'm going to go over to Hollywood and I'm going to come up with this show, or I'm going to go and pitch this as a movie. You guys just hang out here in Pennsylvania. I'll send for you when I need you. And basically that meant that now Dan Carr is sitting around the phone for 8 years or something like that, because 8 of those years Carr wasn't getting anything done. He was getting told no, 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 no. And then the show finally hit. It's only for $2,500 that the guy pays to get the show on the air. Well, pays Ferraro. That's not a lot of money. I'm pretty sure in the 80s it would have been a little bit more. He still owed Carr some money, but I think Carr didn't get his co-credit until season 2. He didn't actually start getting paychecks, like royalties, until I think years later, once the show was off the air. So he was started getting co-credit in like 91 or something like that, and the show went off the air in 1996. So, and but he wasn't involved in any of the reboots, I don't believe. But it's very interesting because WWE and MGM are going to reboot American Gladiators, and both Johnny Ferraro and Dan Carr are going to be involved with it. They're going to be co-producers on the show, and that ought to be fun. They talked about the NBC reboot of American Gladiators with Hulk Hogan. It didn't last very long. Uh, it was. I didn't really watch it that much, to be being honest. The Hulk Hogan thing was kind of off-putting. The Titan games, which of course is a ripoff, that The Rock did, I actually liked that. That was actually pretty good. But I guess that's not coming back. uh, the Stone Cold Steve Austin sort of obstacle course game, I like that too. I wonder what happened to it. I like obstacle course games, man. They're fun. Like I was a big fan of like Pros versus Joes. How many of y'all remember that show? Um, that show ruled. It was on Spike TV. It was called Pros versus Joes, and it was incredible. It was incredible. What an incredible show on Spike TV. Like there should always be a show like that on the air. There should always be shows like American Gladiators and Pros versus Joes and stuff like that. The Broken Skull Challenge. There should always be shows like this on the air. It's why it's not. I have no idea. It's silly to me that Broken Skull Challenge doesn't. I don't know if it's done, if it's like been canceled, or if it's just like on hiatus. I don't know, but let's take a look while I'm here. Has it been canceled? Yeah, it's been canceled. It got canceled in 2019. Uh, it said Broken Skull Challenge. Let's see. Dot dot dot. Okay, yeah, there it is. It got canceled. It got canceled in 2019. I'm trying to figure out. Let's see. He took a 6 month break to do the podcast and all this kind of stuff. Um, he said the rocket scientist that canceled that show. I don't know what happened. With literally no money to spend on advertising, that show performed and it always did good numbers on repeats. But anyways, that is what it is. I always enjoyed that show. So Broken Skull Challenge got it was the last thing that was anything like American Gladiators, and it got canceled. Let's look at Titan Games because I think that's canceled too, and I think that's also been. It was only 2 seasons of this, and it was on NBC, which of course more money than CMT. Yeah, Titan Games was canceled. What year did it get canceled? It got canceled. Oh, last year. It got canceled last year. Says Titan Games hosted by executive producer Dwayne The Rock Johnson, sports and entertainment journalist Kari Champion, and Golden Boy Mendez. Season 2, blah, 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 blah. The second season of Titan Games averaged a .73 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic and a 3.78 million viewers. It says it was down by 43% in the demo and down by 25% in viewership. Wow. Uh, they did 3 million viewers for the Titan Games. That's more than SmackDown. What this wasn't that long ago. This was last year. That means more people watched the Titan Games, a knockoff of American Gladiators, than watched SmackDown. Yeah, it was officially canceled at season 3. Uh, that's okay. I can't believe that Steve Austin's show lasted longer than The Rock's. That's crazy. Um, but that's fine. I think it was a fun show. And now WWE wants to relaunch um, American Gladiators. I'm very interested because they said they're going to use WWE superstars as gladiators on the new American Gladiators reboots that WWE is going to be a part of, and that might work depending on how much what network is going to be on and all that kind of stuff. I think they would be incredibly excited to have a 3.7 million viewers. That would be a win if it's on like USA or something. Um, so I don't know. It says on September 16th, renewed for a second season, which premiered on May 25th, 2020. The ratings for the Titan Games It got a 6 million viewers for the first episode, 5 for the second. Uh, almost it was 6.5 million for the first episode. Over 5.5 million for the second, and it diminished every episode afterward. It got lower and lower. It never got back up to the fives. Once it got down to the fours, it never got back up to the fives. Um, so people were into it at least initially. So it's hard to say what happened, you know. But I like these kinds of shows, man. They need to be on the air. We need more of them. More obstacle course shows, please. All right. Uh, what do you guys got up? What do you guys got in mind? Like, I really like American Gladiators. It's an incredibly fun show with an incredible audience. It's one of those shows that it has such a huge cult following that it wasn't until I started hearing about the documentary that I realized so many people were attached to the show and so many people that were interested in it. And I'm very glad to count myself among them. I had a huge love of the Atmosphere game. It's the game where you get into the big contraption, like a hamster wheel, and you bang into each other like bumper cars. I heard somebody got hurt really bad on that thing because the metal broke and then got jabbed in somebody's thigh or their ass or something like that. It sounded nasty and really bad. Like it sounded awful. But that was a fun game. Powerball, Assault, Joust, and pretty much the Sky Track. I love those games, man. Like it was so inventive. It was so creative. I don't see how you can look down on it, but people managed to do it anyway because it was created by middle class, union workers or whatever. So apparently, but it's like, what was the last great thing in the United States that was created by the upper crust of our society? You know, what was the last great cultural movement that came from the upper crust of our society? It's like it's only the people at the bottom who are, living their lives in a way that is very competitive. I like competition shows anyway, though. Like one of my favorite shows is Chopped. I don't know how many of y'all like the Food Network, but I really, really, really like watching Chopped. I like so things like Broken Skulls Challenge, Titan Games, Chopped, American Gladiators. All that stuff is competition. It's fun to watch. It's fun to watch people under pressure. If you can add like big jack dudes who are like cutting wrestling promos, that helps. That was, the early part of American Gladiators. That was incredibly fun. But just the competition is fun for me. I would much rather watch that stuff than watch football, basketball, or whatever. And Titan Games got canceled, and its ratings were much better than SmackDown's ratings. I'm talking 3 million, 4 million, hovering around that 4 million mark, and it ended up getting canceled anyway. That's crazy. It's crazy to me. Maybe he should have just shopped it somewhere else. But who knows? It might have changed because it is on network television, so maybe they expected more because it was on network TV. But I don't know. Hopefully, when WWE takes over American Gladiators, they could do something fun with it, and it's not just to WWE because it needs to be about the competitions. It needs to be about the contenders. It can't just be about the big jack dudes. And I don't expect to like Brock Lesnar to be one of the guys doing assaults or something like that. It's probably gonna be like a performance center talent. Probably people like the Miz and guys who are bigger than most, but not like the top stars. I don't expect Cody Rhodes to be there with a giant pad trying to stop anybody from scoring points or anything like that. I don't expect no shit. All right, y'all. That's all I had was the American Gladiators 30 for 30. So I'm pretty sure we'll get more grime into the franchise when they do the Netflix documentary. which is more than likely going to be led off by the gladiators and their gripes. Basically, why some of them walked out and got fired or whatever, because they didn't go into that at all in this documentary, which is something you should definitely be talking about. Like if you end up having to fire a bunch of people because they walked off or they refused to perform, you should definitely take time to talk about that. It's like it's nice to revel in the good old days, and then pay some lip service to how dangerous it was, and how it was. There were injuries, and there was some sex, some drugs, some partying, but there was no details. You know, there was light biographies on the performers, not any real detailed biographies. And so I'm thinking that the Netflix one it might be a little bit more grime, and we're gonna do a review of that one too when it pops up. So I'm going to keep my notes on American Gladiators. I was going to throw them in the bin, but now I realize that I'm probably going to need them for when the Netflix biography comes out on it, and we're going to go there. But thank you all. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.